It is officially 8:30 in the morning, Atlanta time. No, California time, 11:30 in the morning, Atlanta time. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So I want to welcome everyone to our July webinar series on diversity, equity, and inclusion, where our team works to really deconstruct diversity concepts, their theories, their methodologies, and unpack information in a way that's easy to digest and still profoundly impactful. First, if you've been on one of our webinars before, or if you have not, let me introduce myself. I'm Darylyn Zenobia Swift. Most people call me DZ Swift, and I'm the Chief Empowerment Officer for Premier Organizational Designs. And we look at everything in organizations that deal with people. And so our focus of expertise are on leadership development, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and building cultures where there's a sense of empowerment and humanity and belonging. So you can follow me personally at d.zenobia Swift on IG, The Empowerment Mindset. But let's just dive right in and talk about it. So today we're discussing mental health and the impact of discrimination at work. We have Dawn Brown and Pastor Alice with us today, and I'm thankful for their participation. But before I ask our guests to introduce themselves, I want to share just a couple of interesting facts. Number one, discrimination is not something that's just experienced, it's felt on every level of a person's existence, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, consciously, and many times with unconscious impact. So it's important to not minimize the effects of discrimination. Number two, when discrimination occurs, it's not only an in-the-moment situation. People wear these pains and these scars, and it can greatly impact their interactions with others, even at work. Number three, when you layer that for some, being discriminated against is a way of life, meaning they experience it so often that they think they're numb to it. But that's not a positive state of existence either. And number four, lastly, it's interesting to note that next to being at home, most Americans spend the majority of their time at work. And it's not possible to just turn off a switch and unfeel the emotional stressors that you're enduring outside the workplace, right? So people come to work cloaked in these traumas, and it impacts the workplace at the individual, the team, the department, and organizational level. So that's why we wanted to talk about the impact of mental health in the workplace. So I'm so excited today to have two colleagues with me that are in the mental health field, and we're going to explore the connection of mental health on the workplace. But before we jump into some questions, I'd like each of you to briefly introduce yourself. We're going to start with Dawn and then on to Pastor Alice. And if you both can just tell us your name, the organization you're with, or your background in mental health, the mental health space, and briefly, what's your association with diversity, equity, and inclusion in connection to mental health? Dawn, let's start with you.
Wow. First of all, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm really excited for this conversation. I have been probably connected to the mental health space for about maybe 20 plus years. And I came through it honest. I came through it because I have a family member who had experienced a mental health crisis. And I went to my pastor, who really wasn't as informed. So that just led me on this kind of quest to learn more about mental health. And I joined an organization called the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I became a teacher and a facilitator. And I just continued to train. And at that point, I'd been training in the DEI space, in education. And so I just started to marry those two conversations around diversity and mental health. And I don't think that there's enough conversation. Pastor Alicia and I were talking about that recently, just around diversity and mental health. And so in that space, I just began to start to look at what can we do. You know, mental health is physical health. And I felt like even early on, if the pastor had known more, I think just treatment and outcome, recovery for my daughter would have been different. She's doing well now, but I just think they would have been different. And so I think that led me to do two things. Number one, stay connected in this space around education. So I spend a lot of time partnering with faith communities and education institutions, cities and colleges, universities, just to bring awareness to and education for mental health. And I do that through my partnership. I'm a consultant for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I provide education for pastors and faith leaders around the country. And I help to partner with them on their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. And that is just to bring more awareness. So I do that. And I in my spare time, I have a nonprofit. So we see clients and we try to
in your spare time.
In my spare time, yeah. So thank you, though. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Next.
Yeah, I'm Alicia Partee, and again, I'm happy to be here. Just as Dawn said, thanks for the invitation. And I currently am a pastor and a licensed and marriage therapist, which I have to say, like Dawn said, sometimes the first entry to getting mental health services is through people that we trust in the community. And so I'm so grateful to be able to serve in both capacities. My journey in mental health started about 2006 when I started my studies and I became licensed in the state of California. When I moved abroad is when it actually expanded and I saw the impact of inequality and just, organizations that needed a lot of support in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and including foreigners in their workspace and culture. And I ended up creating a company to help people actually adjust mentally, emotionally, when they move abroad. You have the moving aspect, but then you have the aspect of how do I fit as me in this new organization that has a different culture. And I end up leading one of the organizations called Professional Women's Network in Norway. And our goal was to advance equality, specifically gender equality, but also because of the country we were in, we were focused on diversity. And end up moving back to the States during COVID, where I returned to a church that I was at as a pastor. My husband's a senior pastor there, and we are launching Assure counseling and coaching. And because we see that there's such a need to have culturally competent providers globally, this is a borderless issue. And I hope to create a nonprofit that not only increases diversity, equity, inclusion by providing not only culturally competent services, but hopefully education to those that are serving or working with these and leading these people, but also make it affordable for the working class. So we don't just see the lower class through Medi-Cal and things like that, and people that can afford 190 hours, but how do we also get to the working class, which is often left out? And so that's who I am.
Thank you so much. And I'm so grateful to have both of you. We're going to jump right into some questions. And the first question that I think is important for us to explore is, can each of you talk about some of the mental health effects and how they show up at work? Like we know that, discrimination happens on so many different levels with different identities. And like I said, you don't turn a switch on and off. So you go to work and you might even experience discrimination at work. What's the effects of this, how does it affect mental health at work? And why do these feelings and stressors linger?
Go ahead. You want to go ahead?
Okay.
I'll let you start. Go ahead.
Okay. One of the things I think is, first of all, if you think about a workplace, when you first accept a job, the first thing you try to do is assimilate. Yeah. And when you try to assimilate someplace, you lose a part of who you are. And one day there comes a reckoning, right? Where you have to say, no, okay, this is not me. Who am I going to be in this new situation? And the way we see it in mental health or illness sometimes is burnout, anxiety, and depression, right? Irrational thoughts. Who am I? Maybe I don't belong here. Imposter syndrome, right? We see people, I don't deserve to be here and things like that. And a lot of times when you think about it, and I know you didn't ask this, but I'll say it, it goes untreated. It goes
Mhm.
untreated because the leader doesn't recognize it.
Absolutely. Yep.
Sometimes the person is not even conscious of it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But there are things that we could measure to kind of, and just offer to employees in a safe way that hopefully they can get some support. So.
Mhm.
I
Very
just
good.
punctuate everything she just said. I think that, a lot of the work that we want to do is educating individuals who are serving, communities and workplaces and environments where we come together. And I think the issue for us, especially for people of color, is we live in community. I mean, that is our ancestral pattern, is community. We
Yeah.
get into workplaces where it's about individualism, which is,
Yeah.
again, another stressor. So
Yeah.
if you start from this cultural, framework of collaboration and community, and you rely on that historical context, and you bring all the wisdom with you, the wisdom of our ancestors, the wisdom of our knowledge, our experience, our education, and then we just kind of have to go it alone. It's kind of like in the mental health industry. And in the mental health industry, it's the only illness where you're taught to go it alone. You're told that, right? Cancer, diabetes, heart disease, they bring your family and let's all have a conversation.
Yes.
Where I
Mhm.
want to sit down and talk. But you talk about mental illness and they're like, can everybody just step outside the room if we want to? And even if you're not well, even if you see the world differently than maybe others can support you in seeing it at that moment, right? You're in psychosis, or you're having thoughts of grandeur, and so you have this perspective that really doesn't come from input from other people. But I think about that when a dear friend of mine was going through cancer, and I remember her doctor walked in to ask her about some of the signs and symptoms, and we all started to step outside the room, and he said, no, your input is important. We need to understand what's going on.
Yes.
But if, when, my daughter was younger and I'd go in, once she turned 18, they're like, can you step outside the room? I said, but isn't it important to hear all aspects? So I think the issue too is that, we are in spaces where individuals who are in charge of our wellness, right, our psychological, creating psychologically safe spaces aren't educated. And that's the issue. If we can get those folks educated, it really does create a pattern where we can say, this person isn't doing very well. And so, we see it differently. We say like, oh, they're not doing well until after they have their morning coffee, right? That's just them until after the first meeting.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
just them until, lunchtime, because, they live for the break, right? We kind of give all these excuses for behavior that shows up that really isn't always healthy or safe. So I think there's just a variety of different factors, and education is important.
Well, what's interesting, and thank you for that. What's interesting is education is absolutely important. And I think education needs to happen on different levels. So people need to be educated about their mental health. Their family needs to be educated about their mental health. But think about how it shows up at work and how it can impact the people around them. And even the managers and leaders in organizations might not know what's happening. So, what are some examples of how it actually shows up at work? Somebody put in about high functioning bipolar. Someone put in about PTSD. Not that we want people to try to diagnose others, because that's harmful, but how can others recognize that maybe someone needs some support? Definitely, we need to give support instead of condemnation. But how can others recognize that somebody might need some support?
Well, I think it's twofold and Pastor, definitely, jump in. But I think it's twofold. I think number one, it's creating spaces where the HR representatives, the senior leadership is aware of what are the signs and symptoms when people aren't doing well. And we need it not just at work, we need it at home, because we bring home with us. I mean, we're not elite athletes where we're taught to compartmentalize our life. We bring, your child is not doing well and you've been up all night, you bring that to work as well. And so I think that the key is just understanding, hey, what does it look like? What are the signs and symptoms that I should be aware of? And then what are the programs I can put in place to support that, so I can normalize the conversation? The issue around stigma is normalizing the conversation. And when mental health, when people aren't doing well from a mental health perspective, it shows up differently in different communities. We language differently depending upon our community. And so if you understand the different languaging, then I think it makes it easier for us to say, let me get this person connected to resources. Or if the person needs to work from home in the morning, let me allow that to take place and they can join the meeting online now that we're more virtual than we've been. Pastor, what do you think?
I think one of the ways it could show up, and a team manager might see it, or their team members first, is they might say, oh my God, they're so moody. One day she's up and one day she's down. One day she's spending money, one day she's not. One day she's talking to me or he's talking to me, and one day he's not. And sometimes just being compassionate people, human beings, asking questions around that. It also could show up as aggression. Yeah. So for example, you had shootings where there was a lot of emotions going around, right? Watching the verdicts and things come out on pins and needles, and you might find someone coming to work and someone says something the wrong way, and they buck a little bit because of recurring trauma, because this is not the first time they've seen it, and they don't have a safe place to talk about it. So it's leaking in these little bursts. And the managers, a lot of them, especially when it is predominantly a non-minority, right? A white person, maybe they don't connect with it. They don't know what's wrong with them, right? And so that's how it shows up. One thing that an organization can do is have a place for people of color to talk. Give them a space. Give them time during the week where they can sit and meet and talk about the issues that they need space. They don't need to be, well, I don't think it's that way. Or, I don't think that, that person was wrong, or the cops are this or that. They don't need that. They need a safe space to be heard, not judged. And I think secondly is intentionally building bridges between cultures. And that also includes a space where people can tell their story and not be judged. And you just sit and be like, I am so sorry that you had to go through that. You don't have to believe me. That's my story. You can't, but how do we do that? And sometimes in mixed company, it's very hard. So don't be intimidated by creating spaces for people of color, letting them talk about their things, having someone on staff or come on site and provide different type of interventions and just helping them lead through that conversation. It's not an option anymore. The leaders have to do this. They have to be conscious leaders if you want to lead.
Absolutely.
Your responsibility is to be conscious.
Absolutely. Can I add one thing too,
yes, go
Carolyn?
Yes,
First of all, thank you, Pastor Alicia. I agree with everything you said. I think one of the things that we talk about at NAMI is creating a format called LEAP, utilizing LEAP, which is listen, empathize, agree, and partner, which is what you're talking about. And if we can teach people the LEAP strategy, it does help, because even when people are in psychosis, right, you can have a conversation with them. You don't have to, that agree with what they're saying. In other words, somebody says somebody is, recording me through the light fixtures. I think our instant reaction is to go, that's not happening. No, blah, blah, blah. But instead to really empathize, what would that feel like, right? Yeah, that doesn't seem fun. That isn't something that seems like, I would want to take place. So first, acknowledging, which is what Pastor was saying, acknowledging what people are saying without making that about your need to correct whether it seems like it fits into what is quote unquote normal, or it seems like it fits into what makes sense. That isn't something that supports a safe environment. So thank you for saying that, Pastor.
No, absolutely. Thank you both. And I want to bring it back to, how it's impacted because of discrimination. So when people are discriminated outside the workplace or even inside the workplace, and they come to work, and the employer might say, you're being sensitive, or you're being a victim, or it couldn't be that bad, which is something that is often heard, whether it is sexism, ableism, generational differences, racism, sexual orientation. People's experiences are just that, they're their experiences. and we deal with it at an individual level. Or they'll say, when will you get better? That just came through the chat. How should leaders respond, or what are some of the tools that leaders can have access to so that they can create a different type of awareness and understanding, and then know how to respond and provide support?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say one of the things for leaders is there are I actually do, like, conscious leadership is a real training. Yeah. And it goes through, how do you increase your awareness of not only how you show up with your employees, how they show up, and how do you maneuver that, right? I think training has to be done. I think you have to bring in well-being, mental health people. I love the leap that you talked about. I think using formats like NAMI already offers, there's so much that's already out there. But what I have found when talking to large organizations, or sometimes even medium-sized, is they don't admit it's a problem.
Right.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah. So just because the leader says it's the problem, if your top management is not trained and you can't figure out how to get that to trickle down, it doesn't matter. So it has to start at the top. It has to start at the top. So that's the first thing I would say. And Don.
I agree. I think that making sure that there are, I agree with the leadership too. I just finished a conscious leadership training. I think it's important. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we can show up anywhere as leaders without bringing all of our issues with us, right? I mean, I have a U-Haul truck in the back. I mean, everything that has troubled me, if I'm not conscious about how to deal with that, impacts how I treat our staff, my colleagues. Mm-hmm. It's just how that works. So I definitely agree that individual training, understand from your own personal journey. I also think having, affinity groups is important. Having the opportunity to have conscious conversation and bringing in, and I think DEI training, I mean, just specifically, when we talk about mental health and diversity, I feel like at times as a employer and as a partner, I think sometimes we just want to be one and done. Like, let me just bring in a couple of DEI people. I'll bring in a couple of therapists. Don can talk about suicide prevention and mental health awareness. We'll just educate the family. And then all of a sudden we're done. And it is a process. It is a journey. It's a continual process. So I would embed wellness in the EAP program. Don't just make it like, let me just make sure we have the top, therapists on site, but who are the therapists? Do they represent the individuals that you're going to refer? Yes. That, I mean, I sit with folks who are like, I don't want to try to first unpack my trauma while trying to help my therapist feel comfortable that I'm 6'5" as a Black male. Right. But yet we do that. We send people to individuals who you have to first unpack your slang. Like, you say this, and what does that mean? And is that culturally sensitive? And then once you've done that, now let's talk about why you're here. Why are you here? And so we don't think about that. So I think that when we start looking at developing training programs and supporting employees and staff, what are we doing consciously to make sure that the individuals that we're referring to them to are culturally competent, are relatable, are reflective of their experience? And once we have that, are we allowing long-term, support systems? So our nonprofit we provide support, as Alicia was saying. So when we have therapists that need to see individuals and income is a factor, we will pay for individuals to get therapy because we don't want that to be a factor. Mm-hmm. But I think that organizations need to build that in as well. They need to make sure that there is a way for individuals to get the support that they need on a continual basis. And if it's only, if a company is only supporting 10 therapy sessions, try to find therapists that, you're not going to spend the first 5 just trying to understand each other's language. I think that's something that we forget about. So training, yes. I think, being able to have honest dialogue, being able to lead, right? I don't have to agree with what you say. It doesn't even have to look like I think it should look. But if that's your truth, let me figure out how to understand that, because teams come together, to be able to further the initiative, the mission of that organization. And if that's not taking place because of these other experiences, then we see a loss of productivity. We see a lot of morale starting to decline, and young people. Let me just tell you, young people, they're not having it. That's what I know about the young folks. They can get a promotion today and resign tomorrow. If the agency is not socially conscious, if they're not looking out for the well-being of everyone,
right,
or just a lot of folks, if they seem to be oppressive and the systems are, outdated, archaic, they tend to be more apt to be moving on. So I just think that there are a series of different ways.
Can I add one thing to that?
Absolutely.
One of the things that really helped me when I didn't learn it until I lived abroad is we went on retreats with different people. I went to a lighthouse, it was no lights. We were like on this island with people different from me, different faiths, different cultures. And what I learned in that is that we had so much more in common, even between a Muslim and a Christian, than we did opposed. And I tell you, those women because it was, in this case, it happened to be, I believe it was all women actually in this one. It was amazing. I have lifelong friends that are different from me now, that can give me different views and can help me build a bridge and understand them more, because I took the time to spend with them. So if organizations can look for organizations like ours that could put these retreats together, go and let's see human to human just how alike we are, and that there's something else too. The last thing I'll say is authenticration is a word I came up with when we were living, because it's not about me assimilating to your culture. It's not even about me just necessarily integrating. Authenticration means I show up authentically me, you show up authentically you. We can respect each other. We can care for each other. We can make space for each other. And so that's a word, and that's a nonprofit that we actually had, is Authenticration. Tell your story. I want to hear you, all of you, because it's all of you and all of us that are going to make a difference, make this world continue to go around.
Absolutely.
And it's that authentic integration. I can't say it together because my mind, that's something my mind needs to put together. But that in and of itself eliminates judgment. And we have this, in our training program, and it's more of a training journey and training experience called Deconstructing Diversity. We try to take it to the individual level, because Don, you mentioned something about people needing to unpack and understand what their own biases are, unconscious and conscious.
That's right.
Because everyone wants to throw out, it's unconscious bias. No, sometimes it's conscious.
Yes.
Sometimes it's very conscious. Yes. And we got to call it what it is. But until managers and leaders are able to understand what their biases are and how they show up at work, and then how they impact the people at work, not just from who gets a promotion, who do we recruit, but even from a physical and mental and emotional standpoint, that work has to be done, and it's not being done well in a lot of spaces and in a lot of organizations. And then when you layer on making space for people to have those authentic conversations and integrate and see that, yes, we're very different, but we are so much more alike. Right. Or even if it's not that we're so much more alike, being able to understand those differences, understand your lived experience based on your differences, the intersectionality.
Absolutely.
That type of awareness and exposure can make a difference.
Yes.
So we've got, everybody's throwing questions in here. So I want to ask a couple of questions that came through the question and answer. So Patricia asked, can there be something set up with human resources to mandate some type of mental health training to be aware of some signs? I know neither one of you are HR professionals, but maybe you can answer, do you think there should be, and what could that look like?
I do. I think there should be. I think, there's, like I'm a mental health first aid trainer. I mean, I train in other ways, but that's one of the training. Suicide prevention. I think that there are ways that individuals can look at small and large group work, because that's what happens in companies. We work individually or in small groups and departments, and we work, towards a larger mission. So I do feel like it is important for HR professionals to identify trainings, and there are those of us out here that are happy to assist in that process, because I do think it matters in how that we look at leadership development, because it does impact. I mean, trauma gets carried in our bodies. Like it impacts our health and well-being. It impacts how we show up for work, not just on an emotional level and how our moods interact and impact also our coworkers, our performance, but it also impacts the money that employers are spending on healthcare, because the reality is it does impact our health. Mental health is physical health. So I think that HR professionals should identify there are organizations that are out here, and our goal is to connect EAP programs with therapists, with companies that are culturally competent, that are serving, and bring in trainers, not just diversity and equity. And if people are going to do DEI training, if companies want to take that on, just like with your deconstructing diversity, Darylyn, it's a process.
It's a process.
It is not something that people just think, and mental health education as well. So, I live in the mental health space as well, not just, diversity, but diversity and mental health. And I think people really think that it's just this thing you do, like, every quarter, we're going to go out here and have this people, they come out, and it doesn't work like that. We really need to have ongoing conversations so that people are aware. So yes, I definitely think that is possible. It's feasible, and we're happy to help.
And I echo that. Can I just say one thing? If we can train on harassment and other discriminatory policies on an annual basis, of course we can mandate well-being and mental health. So I think that should be included in there. So I just wanted to add that to it, but everything else I really just echoed on.
And two people have put in the chat that the mental health first aid would be very helpful.
It would be.
It is. It's expensive, though,
because for those that don't know what that is, can you speak very briefly on what that is? I want to get to the other two questions.
Yeah, I was going to show the book because I have it, but it is something
great.
Yeah, it's like lay counselors. I'll grab it before the next question but it's for lay counselors. So I actually just attended a training to be certified in that program and to instruct. So churches and organizations can be trained on it. They can, and then you empower your people to not diagnose or do anything that mental health professionals do, but definitely be that conscious worker to be able to identify things and understand when you need to move someone to more support. It is a very detailed, it's nice. It's a very good program. It is a little cost imperative. So it'd be nice if organizations could collaborate to get some trainers on so that we can train more people. But it is a way to get lay people, or should I say non-mental health professionals, engaged in the work.
And can I add to that too?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I think one of the things too, as a mental health first aid trainer, is that we want to tag in the right people. And I think that's also equally important. I think there's adult mental health first aid and there's youth mental health first aid. And I think it'd be, so companies that are kind of community focused, that are trying to build and support their employees, I think it would be in their best interest to do both, right? So adult mental health first aid is looking at what are the signs and symptoms that I see among my coworkers that alert me that I might need to tag in somebody. What are ways that I can talk to somebody who is experiencing suicide ideation? Who do I tag in, and how do I have that conversation to help get them connected to services, but keep them safe before we get them connected to services?
Yes.
And then on the youth mental health first aid side, for all of those employees who are parents like myself, right? It's important when a company can help you prepare to keep your family safe, because it's still 1 in 5, right? We still see it with people who are going to work every day while managing, a young person or a family member or a loved one, whether they're adult or child, who is struggling in their mental health. And what do we do? And how, and the more empowered we are, the less stressed we are, right? We feel like we have a sense of community, and it's obtainable. We can address it and solve it.
Right. Thank you very much for that. I want to move to the next question, which is, why are there not enough EAP counselors that are minority? When I requested the service from my employer and I was given the 800 number and I asked to, do they have any that are minority? It's hard for a non-minority to truly grasp microaggression or how these exact issues in the workplace where culture is a factor.
I think it really is just awareness. So I'm working with several therapists right now. So our organization's Leaders of Tomorrow, one of the things that we do is we connect people to therapists and clinicians and psychologists, psychiatrists who are in the BIPOC community. That's important. And so I think it really is just trying to help employers understand why it is important to have culturally relevant therapists and clinicians. I think that, through the lens of mental health, people don't really think of that like, oh, as long as you get a good therapist, that should be okay. I think what the last, 4 years or so have shown us is that there is a limited amount of trust in therapists based on a lot of the social, political experiences that we have witnessed. And I think that's just true. We have to just be honest that, it impacts how safe people feel in sharing things with their doctors or their primary care physicians. I sit with Kaiser's Permanente Learning Collaborative. They have a suicide learning collaborative with chiefs of staff around the country. And one of the things that they've even seen is just the decrease in individuals keeping their appointments. So it is important for wellness and well-being for people to understand that, if we're feeling traumatized, because I think we carry trauma individually and collectively as a BIPOC community. So when we see things that are traumatic and we experience that, we do come back and think, can I trust this person? Can I trust? I mean, we see it with the vaccinations. Do I really trust that they're going to give me an actual vaccination? And so I think when we're looking at that, we have to be intentional when we're trying to bring services. And in the defense of a lot of HR individuals, I just think there's a lack of education and connection. So I think that we tend to, in the workspace, hang out with people that we feel comfortable with and or know. And so if you don't have a network of people that reflect your, your community or the community that you're serving, then it is important for us to kind of expand that network so that we can get connected.
Absolutely. This next question, Pastor Alicia, might be a perfect one for you. It says, please share advice for those of us who are constantly assimilating to new faith communities, work organizations, and residential communities due to military connections. I recently approached my supervisor with this challenge as it relates to my role and productivity. My experience as a military spouse endeavoring to salvage a career has been quite the challenge. Any thoughts?
That's a tough one, and that's one I'm very, very compassionate about, is because that's what I work with, was diplomats and militaries that moved abroad. Military, especially what we don't like to say it, but the trailing spouse, which is what I was. And I think the first thing is to be intentional about transition. What I found is there is culture shock, right? Anytime you move abroad, it doesn't matter how trained we are or what, there is a place where you get there and we automatically I'll tell you my story. I moved abroad. I thought, oh, I'm professional. I can do this. Everything is under control. And I was trying to fit in so much that one day I looked up in a mirror in tears and I asked myself, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go through a restructuring of myself. I went through the basics using business type of things and mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I actually took things like 16 personalities. I did Strength Finder, all those things just to say, who am I and what do I want to do? And it started with me. It was my own journey. And I said, if I had, and I hope I live abroad again, I hope I have an opportunity to do this, I would be intentional about it. I would understand there are things that are going to happen, right? Where when I first get there, I won't be able to find my comfort food. I won't be able to do that. But what can I do? What resources and what support group can I put in place so that I can? I understand that, when you follow military, your career, because it's a lot of times, especially when we're younger, is how we're defined, right? We feel like that's how we're defined. So when we move abroad and we can't work in our field, then we have to figure out who we are. I would say definitely map out your skills and the things that you've learned. The good part is there's technology now, and you can figure out how to recreate who you are, not who they want you to be, but who you are. And you can actually still serve the community that you want to serve because of technology. Yeah. So I would look for ways, but I think go on a journey for being you. You do have to start with learning the culture and the things around you, because you do want to be relevant where you are, but then show up as yourself. Right. Figure out how to use technology and leverage who you are.
That's right.
Right. So this has been such an awesome discussion, and we only have 4 minutes left. So I'm about to wrap it up, but you ladies, I need you back. I need you back. We have to continue. We're going to do a part 2 of this discussion.
Oh, please. Yes.
Maybe for the month of September, if you all are willing, because there's so many questions that are still coming through. I'll tell you what a couple of those questions are. We won't answer them, but we're going to talk about these in part number 2. It's talking about acts of microaggression and the impact of microaggressions on people's mentality. And then also the sudden boom in telehealth therapy. Has it given us a better opportunity to connect with therapists who are more BIPOC? What are your thoughts about that? And then I know a question is, what are some of the best websites or resources to connect to? And everyone that's on the webinar, we always send a follow-up email. Make sure you drop your email in the chat box so that you can get information. We'll try to give some answer to some of these and send it out in email. But I wanted to, as we close up, I want a 1 minute response to this specific question. Why has racism specifically been deemed a public health crisis? And what other communities of people, like LGBTQ community, is discrimination against them is also a public health crisis? What does that mean that racism is a public health crisis?
That's a good question. I have thoughts.
Or maybe
I'll let you go.
Hold that for the next. Maybe we'll hold that for the next one.
Well, I think that's a good idea, because I think if we get started, I do have thoughts about it. The CEO of NAMI National did deem racism a public health crisis. But I do think it'd be good to come back where we can tease it out and have a larger discussion, because I don't know if you can answer it in a minute. But I will say this: I think it impacts our health significantly. It impacts how we're treated. It impacts our experience, for individuals, even in the Muslim community, who might call on the police or call on an individual for support and become the victim of that call. That happens often for folks who have an illness and folks of different, especially for African Americans. So I think that, it's a conversation that we need a lot of discussion around. There's a movie, if I can say this, there's a movie called The Wisdom of Trauma by Dr. Gabor Mate. And he talks about trauma being, there's wisdom in trauma. And I think it would be a great kind of maybe homework assignment. Wow. And they're doing, I think, a free seminar this weekend or a free movie showing this weekend. And there's conversations, and there's an individual named Resma Menachem who talks about white body supremacy, who talks about racism. and its impact on our body. And Gabor Mate, who's a physician, talks about that as well. So I think that might be a really good kind of pin that we can put in right now, and then come back and talk about it in greater detail.
Yeah. I'll say something in 30 seconds, though. I would say something that has already been there and has been unseen is now being seen and cannot be denied. And it's being politicized, and it's splitting parties and faith communities. So, of course, it's going to move towards being a public health crisis. And also, we saw in the pandemic that the world is not as big as we thought.
We did, yeah.
Yeah, and some of the same things that we're seeing in America is what we're seeing abroad as it relates to discrimination and inequality. So I'll stop there, but I do think it's much longer conversation.
Well, I think that we've just come up with our topic for September. Ooh. Racism is a public health crisis. So I'll connect with you too, and maybe we can have someone from NAMI come on as well. I do want to close out today just by teeing up, because we do these monthly, and I want to tee up what our next discussion is, which is something that has been a hot topic right now, and it's about the misunderstanding of critical race theory. Mm. So we're going to peel back the layers and talk about what it is, what it's not, and its modern day application. I hear so many people talking about what they think critical race theory is, and there's a lot of misinformation. And unless you've really studied it at the academic level, I think people go off of what they've heard it is, or what someone else is saying it is. So we want to peel back the layers of that. So again, put your information in the email, in the chat box, so that we can make sure you get an invitation to that. We're going to have part 2 because there's more questions that have come in through even the LinkedIn chat that I think we really need to respond to. And I am so appreciative to both Dawn and Pastor Alicia for sharing such valuable information. We appreciate your input, your knowledge, and your practical experience in the mental health field. And we hope that you will be back here with us in September.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. So as we wrap things up, I want to provide a couple of reminders. We do these monthly, so make sure you follow me on LinkedIn or follow our business page, Premier OD, so you can be informed about these very timely discussions. And also on Facebook with Dara Lynn and the Premier OD team. And then also, we're going to send a follow-up to this podcast today. We do record, and we want to make sure that you have access to it. But for today, it's a wrap, and we're signing off. So don't forget to share your email address in the chat, and we hope to engage with you soon. Thank you for attending.